We thought you might like it.
Do you want to see it? Can we get a picture of people doing that? I would love to get a
Did former President Donald Trump attempt to buy a firearm when he was in South Carolina during a campaign stop? A lot of people jumping on this. Rather fascinating, as you've got another story about purchasing firearms, making some headlines with Texas Senator Ted Cruz revealing what Intuit is doing. Back at it. Good morning, Springfield's Morning News on WMAY. So yesterday, former President Trump was in South Carolina making stops at various places, including a boat store, boat manufacturer, but also a firearms store in South Carolina, where he talked about, pistol brace rule, and he says he'll take care of that, but also kind of showing a little bit of ignorance when it comes to firearms in general. He had to be told what a Glock was. So he was walking by one of the, just kind of bizarre to see actually, of a former president walking around a gun store with Secret Service all around him, their eyeballs trained on all of the firearms that there are on the walls and everything. I'm not sure if they had live ammunition in there, if they had to remove that, but regardless, campaign stop for the president, where he walked by and saw a firearm that he liked.
Sean, you make sure you're taking some pictures. We got plenty of pictures being taken right now.
Oh, I like that one. We thought you might like it.
Do you want to see it? Can we get a picture of people doing that? I would love to get a picture.
I do want to see that.
All right.
Wow, that's something, huh?
Hey, Julian,
Is it made by you? That one's not.
Okay, can you take this picture?
yes, sure. You wonder what Congress people can do.
He talks about that's a Glock, and they have to explain to him what a Glock is and so on. But apparently on social media, one of his spokespeople said that he had purchased a gun, but then had to retract that and say he wanted to purchase a gun. The spokesperson for Trump, Stephen Chang, posted, but then retracted that on X, formerly known as Twitter, and indicated that he wanted to buy one. But federal law, according to reports, prohibits the sale of guns to people under felony indictments and bars them from receiving a gun which has been shipped or transported in interstate or foreign commerce. However, you've got that Bruin decision out of the U.S. Supreme Court that could raise questions of whether or not such a law, federal law prohibiting people who are under federal indictment from purchasing guns is unconstitutional. So that aside, kind of fascinating to see that. But the issue of purchasing guns, that's one of the ways some gun rights advocates see that the gun control lobby is trying to go after to limit people's ability to purchase firearms. And in particular, you've got the story that U.S. Senator Ted Cruz out of Texas has highlighted, saying that accounting software company Intuit reversing their ban on gun-related businesses. The company said two banking partners, J.P. Morgan Chase and Bank of America, pressured them to enforce that policy. So Ted Cruz writing in a letter that Intuit decided to reverse their decision on this. And rather fascinating to read from some of this. Intuit does like QuickBooks, for instance. Firearms manufacturers were not allowed to access QuickBooks' payroll service, while entities that sold guns were ineligible for QuickBooks' payment processing service. Cruz said, I welcome Intuit's reversal of its policy that had forbidden gun manufacturers and sellers from using certain QuickBooks services. He said that in a letter yesterday. Intuit's recent decision to allow such businesses to use the company's payroll and payment services, a change prompted by my staff's oversight investigation, was long overdue. Cruz went on to say that they were only notified because of Dawson Precision, a Texas firearms parts manufacturer, informed his office that Intuit, without warning, terminated the business's subscription. He goes on to say in his letter, Dawson Precision only discovered what had happened after it submitted payroll, and rather than receiving confirmation the payroll had been processed, received a notification that its payroll subscription had been terminated. Intuit later said that it canceled Dawson Precision's account because as a firearm manufacturer, it was violation of Intuit's acceptable use policy. So again, you can see this isn't the government coming in and trying to limit sales. This is the private sector coming in and essentially deplatforming people. In their ability to, have a legal exchange of firearms. But the letter goes on to say that Cruz's staff will continue their investigation to ensure that no financial service firm unnecessarily limits the firearm industry's access to accounting or banking products. And they went on to say that J.P. Morgan Chase demanded that it enforce such policies. Bank of America was asked also to have Intuit block firearms manufacturers from using QuickBooks payroll services. JP Morgan asks it to restrict payment processing services. JP Morgan acknowledged to Mr. Cruz's staff that it did issue such a directive. Bank of America, however, Cruz's letter says, denied that it had ever given Intuit any instruction related to the firearms manufacturers or selling. Fascinating to see this. Again, while you've got, the lawsuits against state laws from California to Washington to Illinois, all of these various jurisdictions dealing with challenges of gun laws, those are based off of government action. But you've got the private sector in this revelation highlighting how, indeed, there's this question of different types of gun control methods that some people may want to try to implement. You've also got the lawsuits against gun manufacturers and the gun industry. You had a case over in California where a federal judge slapped that down, but in Illinois, you've got a case pending of a similar law allowing for lawsuits against the gun industry for allegedly making the environment less safe or for advertising to children or for paramilitary or militia activities the state deems illegal. So just a collection of different ways to, I guess, control the flow of firearms when it comes to people being able to access those things. Even to the point of, the former president, whether or not he is even eligible to purchase a firearm if he wanted to, because he's facing federal indictments. It's just one turn after another, right? Why not? And coming back, another interesting story about firearms, not in the United States, but over in the UK. London cops lay down guns in protests. That's a story that's out this morning as well. We'll touch on that. Stay tuned. So in the United States, we have the Second Amendment, which is a well-regulated militia being necessary for the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. That's not the case over in the UK, and where, they don't really have that right. Kind of one of the fundamental things that this country's founders put in the U.S. Constitution specifically to address not being a serf to overseas royalty. But this story coming out of London, cops lay down guns in protest. The Associated Press this morning saying that London police have been forced to call on neighboring departments and the military for backup after scores of specially trained firearms officers refused to carry guns after a murder charge was filed against a colleague. So this clearly is a question of the optics of a recent story that had a unarmed individual shot and killed by a licensed firearms carrying police officer. So the Met over in London, it's their police force. They've got about 34,000 officers, but about 2,500 are licensed to carry firearms. So some of those actually decided not to carry their guns after prosecutors last week filed murder charges against an officer who was involved in the shooting of an unarmed black man in South London earlier in the year last year. So kind of interesting to see that headline, as here in the United States, you've got just a mountain of headlines about gun laws and how those are being litigated in court, and the questions of access to firearms, not just the lawsuits against state laws. You've got the pistol brace rule. You've got the frames and receiver rule. These are all from government laws and edicts and such. But then you look again at the private sector, where you've got Intuit that is reversing their policy after pressure from two huge banks that U.S. Senator Ted Cruz highlighted in his recent investigation. This is clearly an issue that is a focus of a lot of people. It's something that I think, just looking at analytics of this program and of stories I write about firearms and the trajectory of cases in Illinois, a lot of people interested in this, clearly, because they see it as a fundamental right in the U.S. Constitution. And all of the efforts there are in the various states to try to curb access to firearms using various mass shootings or violent crime as the impetus to restrict access to firearms, despite the Second Amendment and all of the legal wrangling over the definitions of words in the Second Amendment. Right? What is an arm? When it says the right to keep and bear arms, what's an arm? Is a magazine for a AR-15 considered an arm? Is it no longer considered an arm if it has more than 10 rounds in the magazine? Is it no longer considered an arm if it's got 15 rounds in the magazine? Is it no longer considered an arm if it's a semi-automatic firearm instead of just being a revolver or some kind of lever action firearm, and what constitutes firearms or arms? These are the types of things that courts are dealing with. But again, as I'll reiterate, it's not just state laws that could limit firearm access. You've got the private sector and the deplatforming of sorts that is being attempted by some of the big banks and putting pressure on payment processing companies like Intuit to block firearm industry companies from even accessing those types of tools. It's fascinating. There's no question. And I think, again, why people are so interested in all of this, especially here in the United States, is because they see the efforts from gun control advocates using all means possible through laws that they pass, through blocking sales of certain things, to even allowing lawsuits against the firearms industry, and even moving forward with different types of schemes like the firearm owner identification card that's been in place in Illinois since the 60s, and prohibiting the sale of certain items, or your ability to make a firearm at home for your own personal use, to even the private sector and those types of pressures. So we'll continue to cover all of this and more, but interesting to see just the questions of deplatforming individuals' ability to purchase certain types of firearms.